Thanks for coming back to the channel. Today we're gonna talk about the Afrikaners refugees to the US, the 49 Afrikaners that arrived in US 2 days ago, I think, and the situation between US and South Africa right now. Over the past 3 months, Trump has suspended aid to South Africa, expelled the South African ambassador, and offered refugee status to white South Africans. A group of 49 white South Africans have arrived in the US as refugees, a status that is normally given to people fleeing from extreme persecution. They have been given a warm welcome by the Trump administration. A contrast, as most refugees have been halted from entering the United States. This group has been singled out favorably by the Trump administration on unfounded claims that there is an ongoing genocide against white farmers in South Africa. Here is Trump talking to journalists about his decision.
It's a genocide that's taking place that you people don't want to write about, but it's a terrible thing that's taking place, and farmers are being killed. They happen to be white, but whether they're white or black makes no difference to me, but white farmers are being brutally killed and their land is being confiscated in South Africa.
This is a ridiculous statement from a sitting US president. Afrikaners are the richest group on the continent. They have 20 times more assets than black South Africans. There is no known Afrikaners refugee camp inside South Africa. There have not been a record of international border crossings of white farmers fleeing persecutions.
But we don't have the phenomenon of people fleeing the country as we do with refugees all over the world. About 38 million refugees in the world who, by definition, are people who've crossed an international border because they're fleeing persecution, they're fleeing war, they're fleeing conflict. And there are no Afrikaner refugee camps. The UN High Commissioner for Refugees didn't refer any South Africans of any background, of any race, of any language for resettlement in the last year. So this is something really new and different from anything we've seen.
These are things you observe when there is a persecution going on in a country. It normally takes years for someone to be able to get resettled, and the UN High Refugee Commission has to recommend you to your host country. The process is very long and sometimes very brutal. The people who arrived were flown in on chartered flights paid for by the United States government. Listen how the process is done normally.
I mean, one, you often have refugees that have spent years and years in refugee camps. And then, out of the millions of refugees in the world, less than 1% are ever even referred for third country resettlement. They have exhaustive vetting, security screening, health screening, screening to make sure that they actually do have a well-founded fear of being persecuted. And they usually are people that have great difficulties in the country of first asylum. They're people that have difficulties in the refugee camps in which they're living. Maybe they're being persecuted in the country of first arrival as well. So these are circumstances that you would assess on a case-by-case basis. And that takes a long period of time to do. This was done in 3 months. And these are people that came directly from their country of origin. They were not people that were living in refugee camps. They were not people that were vetted by the UN Refugee Agency or referred to the United States in the normal way. And they were flown here in chartered planes paid for directly by the US. Usually it's the International Organization for Migration that does travel loans that refugees are expected to pay back actually upon arrival.
It is not a normal way for refugee resettlement. You have to go through a process, a very long process of vetting. And remember, the Trump administration has halted the refugee resettlement from a number of countries, especially Middle East and African countries. White South Africans have been allowed to come in, while people from majority Black and brown countries are kept out. Listen again to Bill, how he explains it.
Clearly, there's a racial twist here. When you see again, going in the first Trump administration, where he described Haitians as coming from four-letter word countries, that he said he wanted people that looked like Norwegians to come to the United States. And in 2018, long before the Russians had invaded Ukraine, under the first Trump administration, the group that he chose to increase the refugee numbers were Ukrainians, while there was a dramatic decrease, slashing of refugee numbers in Africa, in the Middle East, and in the rest of the world. And so now we've seen a complete closing of the door, a total suspension of the refugee resettlement program for all refugees everywhere, and then 18 days later, another executive order that privileges only white South Africans.
Of course, there is a racial twist. There are wars on a continent, especially in Eastern Congo and Sudan. In Sudan, more than 15 million people fled the country. The security and humanitarian crisis spilled over the borders. You have more than 15 million that fled the country because of the crisis. But none of those people are allowed to come into the United States. Only Afrikaners, who are white South Africans, descendant of Dutch colonizers who created the apartheid, the most cruel and brutal system that ruled until 1994, when black South Africans, the overwhelming majority, were allowed to vote for the first time, and they voted for this man, Nelson Mandela.
One of the mistakes which some political analysts make is to think that their enemies should be our enemies.
Afrikaners took the land from black people through the Native Land Act in 1913. They oppressed them, and 3 decades later, they still have that land. Black people make up 80% of the population and only own 4% of private land in South Africa. President Cyril Ramaphosa was asked why these people are leaving, and this is what he replied.
Well, we've raised our own concern because those people who are being enticed to go to the United States do not fit the definition of a refugee. A refugee is someone who has to leave their country out of fear of political persecution, religious persecution, or economic persecution. And
that's what the United States says they're undergoing in South Africa. That's why they've opened the door for them.
Yes, and they don't fit that bill. They don't fit that description. And I had a conversation with President Trump on the phone, and he said, what's happening down there? And I said, President, what you've been told by those people who are opposed to transformation back home in South Africa is not true. And I added to him, I said, we were well taught by Nelson Mandela and other iconic leaders like Oliver Tambo on how to continue to build a united nation out of the diverse groupings that we have in South Africa. We're the only country on the continent where the colonizers came to stay, and we have never driven them out of our country. So they are staying, and they're making great progress. It's a fringe grouping that does not have a lot of support, that is anti-transformation and anti-change, that would actually prefer to see South Africa going back to apartheid type of policies. And I said to him, I would never do that. I learned at the feet of Nelson Mandela, and we intend to proceed with the implementation of our constitutional architecture. And I thought in my conversation with him early in the morning at 4 o'clock South African time, he understood that. And I said, I'd like to come and meet him so that we can discuss this matter further. So those people who have fled are not being persecuted. They are not being hounded. They are not being treated badly. And they are leaving ostensibly because they don't want to embrace the changes that are taking place in our country in accordance with our Constitution. So we think that the American government has got the wrong end of the stick here, but we'll continue talking to them.
Of course, they are leaving because they don't want to embrace the land reform. The government of South Africa was trying to fix the consequences of apartheid, the same system that allowed white people to accumulate an enormous amount of wealth over the years at expenses of black people. During one of the biggest agriculture exhibits in the world, I think it's the biggest in Southern Hemisphere, President Cyril Ramaphosa said that the people who are leaving are cowards. Now, I don't want to call people cowards, but I think these guys saw an economic opportunity and they took it. They are not leaving because they are persecuted. They are not leaving because their land is being taken. They're just leaving to get a better opportunity. That's all. And the Evangelical Church, which is the MAGA movement base, yesterday they told the US government that they cannot continue work with them on the refugee resettlement program because of this issue. Here is the pastor, one of the Evangelical Church pastor talking to Reuters.
The reality is we felt like we cannot be ourselves as the Episcopal Church and take part in this step of resettling white Afrikaners from South Africa. The moral decision making for us has so much to do with the way in which this all took place. The refugee resettlement program, which we've been a part of for more than 40 years, was basically shut down in January. So almost no refugees have been admitted to the United States since the end of January. People that have been waiting for years and are still waiting, who have been of service to this country, who are persecuted, are waiting to receive entrance. And this particular group has been fast-tracked over top of all of these others. So right there, that's problematic. And really, it's hard to imagine they fit the definition of refugee by most definitions. The president can certainly determine who he wants to admit to the country, but it just doesn't align with our values at this point.
We don't want to see people be.
I don't know what the administration's motivations for it is. I can't speak to that. But what it appears to us is that some people are being privileged over others, and it appears that white people are being privileged over people of color for no real apparent reason that data at least shows. So we feel like it's a line we've been asked to cross. Our hand's been forced, and we feel like we're doing the honorable thing and just asking to be released from our obligations.
And it's not just the Evangelical Church. Some of the people inside the Republican Party and the right-wing media are not happy with this decision. They're saying that Trump is being influenced by Elon Musk, Peter Thiel, and David Sachs. And this is going to be the topic in my next video. I just want to touch on the Native Land Act that was introduced by the apartheid in 1913. The reforms that the current government is trying to introduce. I think last year they adopted what they call it, the Expropriation Act, and we're gonna talk about how the paper mafia is involved in all of this. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you.